Hi, and welcome to another episode of The Big Game Hunters. I'm Mike.
And I'm Tom. Today we're going to look at Bonanza from designer Uwe Rosenberg. But first, chit-chat.
In today's chit-chat, we're going to continue discussing the mechanical elements of games. Today, we'll be looking at elegance in game design. We hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the chit-chat. Today, we're going to be discussing elegant game design. Just get right into it. Okay. Elegant design is a term that we have used quite a bit on the show. It's something that I really look for in a game. I would say it's probably one of my top factors when I'm evaluating how much I like a game.
Sure.
It really annoys me when games have extraneous elements, things that I think aren't part of its kind of core gameplay, things that feel like kind of patches after the fact. So, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, elegant design is any design that I think that has, no extra fluff on it, that the mechanics all kind of hold together, that you feel like there's nothing kind of just hanging out there, that everything fits together to form a cohesive framework for the game.
Okay, so you're talking about things that they're elements of a game, they exist, they're part of the game, but they're not really used to they're not a fully effective use of how the game works.
Well, that would be inelegant design. That would be something that detracts from it.
Right. That's what I meant.
So for elegant design, it's anything where it's kind of streamlined. So now it doesn't mean that an elegant game can't be complicated. For instance, we took a look at Star Trek Fleet Captains. There's a lot to that game. It's a meaty game.
Sure.
It takes a little while to get into. There's 8 actions you can take on your turn. You take 3 actions on a turn. You can move each ship every turn. You can make a power adjustment with each ship every turn. You can cycle in a mission card and a command card every turn. There's a lot in that game. There's a bunch of stats on the ships. There's just a ton in that box. But it all holds together through a few repeated mechanics. So everything in Star Trek Fleet Captains is more or less derived from the skill checks. You have you take your ship's relevant value, you roll a d6 and add it. And in a combat, you compare your weapons to the opponent's shields. In a opposed sensor test, or when trying to detect a ship, your sensors opposed to their shields, your sensors opposed to their sensors, your sensors opposed to a certain difficulty. There's a lot that's captured in that game that's all derived from that one rule.
I'm reminded of seasons. There's a lot of elegance in the design of seasons. Mm-hmm. There's how, starting with the power track that determines what cards you can play, the energy wheel itself. Not only does it tell you, it informs the player how you're what's gonna come up on the die or what's likely to come up on the die, but it serves as the reference chart for what you can trade things in as, and all that works into how you're gonna pay for your cards. What am I missing on seasons?
That's about
that
it.
Covers it.
I mean, and that's the great thing about seasons. So that's a good example because there isn't too much to seasons. There aren't elements that are just kind of out there. I think the bonuses are maybe the best example of something that's a little bit of inelegance because the bonuses are a relatively small part of the game, but they take up a little bit of time to explain, and they do feel a little bit tacked on. It does feel like something that you can also do these things. We wanted to throw some more stuff in. Here it is.
Sure.
The one that really comes to mind as being not quite in line is the bonus that allows you to draw an additional card when you draw a card from a die. Mm-hmm. That feels not in line with the rest. It feels like that one is almost never used.
It's that particular choice in that set of choices that makes me think that whole system is tacked on to the design. Mm-hmm. Just because they got some feedback or something, who knows what happened, but it feels like they got some feedback and somebody just felt like they needed to be able to draw more cards, so they gave them that option.
Sure, and that kind of thing where you have something that feels either tacked on or something that's just not pursued very much. A lot of times you have a lot of rule space or a lot of design space devoted to something that doesn't come up frequently or that doesn't have a great bearing on the game. For instance, Battlestar Galactica comes to mind. Battlestar Galactica kind of rulesy. There's a lot going on in it. Every part of the ship, all 7 rooms or whatnot, have their own individual actions. You have action cards in 5 different colors. There's a lot going on in that game.
And there's stuff going on outside the ship too. Like you have the the board is moving against you, and you have to control your stuff against that board.
Yeah, absolutely. And you constantly have to reference the chart on how you roll dice against the various ships. And the thing that I'm thinking of really that it seems both an element of overproduction and an element of inelegant design are the Raptors.
Yeah.
I haven't played with the expansions for Battlestar. Maybe
they could have been an element that was included in the base theme in order to expand in the expansion.
I've used some of the extra characters and whatnot, but I haven't,
Sure.
But in the base game, at least, Raptors are little plastic ships that you only use once in a great while for one kind of card effect.
And the reason that really stands out is because the other plastic ships in the game all have a purpose. They have a clear purpose. Either you're using it or they're being used against you. And the Raptors are just a thing you can lose with.
Yeah, all you do is risk Raptors, and it just feels like, why are they there?
Epic Duels is another one that comes up. So in Epic Duels, you have the standard actions of playing a card, drawing a card, and healing. But almost all games, you will never see a player heal just because it's so inefficient. It requires one of your actions, and it requires one of your cards, and it's only one point of healing. And when you're talking about a game where damage can range from 4 to 12 points in a single turn, and you've only got 13 to 20 hit points altogether, that 1 point of healing for an action is just not a good trade. Now, you do see it used, especially in larger multiplayer games where a person can go run and hide, and maybe they're trying to avoid a card that just immediately will kill them, so they need to heal beyond that point. That's about the only time you ever see it. But otherwise, the healing aspect really feels like it's only included just because we needed a third option.
I feel like healing's an interesting one because you do want something in there to be able to heal. If healing were better, it would really destabilize the game. The game would take forever. It would go on and on.
Sure.
You wouldn't be able to kill anybody. So it kind of has a purpose, but it doesn't, not enough of one to justify for an otherwise very clean game being a third of the actions. And I think that's something that really makes it stand out. So games that are otherwise really clean and really hold together well, that have some little weird niche thing in them. Ticket to Ride, for instance. When I was teaching Ticket to Ride, I came across in the rule book that if you have 3 of the multicolored or man trains in your set at once, you wipe the whole set and take 5 new ones. That's a rule that I had forgotten because it never happens. It hardly ever happens. And it seems like there doesn't seem to be much reason to have a rule like that when it's so forgettable and it's so unnecessary to an otherwise very simple design.
What else did we need to say about elegant design?
I just think I think that pretty much covers it. The idea that you should, when looking at a game, that's just one of the things I really look at. And I guess I wanted to kind of codify what we mean when we're talking about elegance in design, because it just kind of annoys me when there are things in a game that I have to go over and then kind of give that caveat with that, well, this won't be very important, or you won't see this much, but, and yeah.
It's it does come up in our breakdowns a lot when we call something elegant or in the originality, something like that. It'll come up in our breakdowns a lot, and it is good to know what that term means, especially because you particularly like so many games that are elegant. And
I think I will have a certain range of tolerance for inelegance in a certain genre of game. For instance, one of the reasons that I don't like Last Night on Earth, but you're, I think, more okay with it.
Yeah.
For me, it's very rulesy, and the rules don't really hang together.
It is.
I mean, there are a lot of rules in it, and you just have to kind of go through them one at a time.
It's unfortunate, but true.
And so that's one thing, but that's the kind of game that I really don't love it enough to forgive it. I don't love it enough to give it a pass. And for a lighter game like that, I really want it to be clean, because I want it to be easy to teach. I want it to be easy for people to get into it. I don't want to have to look things up when I'm playing it. I think that's what it comes down to. For certain games like Thunderstone, they are a little rulesier, and there are some weirdnesses. In the original Thunderstone, your hero died when he reached 0 strength. Yep. It's a very rulesy kind of rule, and they removed it, and I think that was a good call. But I can forgive those kinds of things in a game like that because it's a kind of deeply strategic game. I don't mind every once in a while looking something up in the rule book or reference book because it's such an engaging game otherwise.
Yeah, you're playing that game to exercise your mind and defeat your opponent through strategy.
Exactly.
Rather than just have a good time.
I think Space Cats is a great example of a game that way too rulesy. That game if that were an elegant game, that'd be an easy 10 or 11 on my scale.
That's the weird thing about Space Cadets, because all of those games are so simple.
Yes.
There's really nothing.
It's easy to give you the gist of Space Cadets.
Yes.
I can give you the gist of Space Cadets in 10 minutes. It's hard to teach it fully.
Yeah. Some of the inelegance of that game comes from everyone needing to understand the rules in order to play it well.
Because you have the roll shuffle, and because that's a party game, and for games like that, they have to be clean.
Yeah.
Or else, that's really where elegance comes in, I think.
The party for that game is learning it.
Really. But yeah, I think that's about all for elegant design.
Yep.
Something to kind of take a look at and talk about after a game. We talked in game criticism about different things you should be looking at, different things you might want to talk about in the context of a game. That's something that comes up for me over and over.
I've never looked at it until you brought it up, but yes, it is something I consider now looking back on the games I play.
Yeah, take it home with you, Tom. So now I'm going to teach you how to play Bonanza, a very clean game. Now I'm going to teach you how to play Bonanza. Bonanza is a game about bean farmers trading their beans at market. You heard that right. To win the game, you'll need the most gold coins at the end. The game ends as soon as the deck is depleted 3 times. If this happens during phase 4 of the turn, the game ends immediately. If, however, it happens during phase 2, then you play the game out through phase 3 of the current turn. Bonanza is a very simple design and has only 2 major components: the deck of bean cards and 7 third bean field cards, which can be purchased at one point during the game for players to plant a third field. The bean cards all have the same stats on them. In the middle, you'll see some really fun art and a number in the center of the card that will tell you how many of each card are in the deck. In other words, the coffee bean has 24 copies of itself in the deck. At the bottom, you'll see what's called the beanometer. The beanometer tells you how many coins the beans are worth if you harvest a certain number. For instance, if you harvest 4 coffee beans, you'll trade them in for 1 gold coin. But if you take them to completion and harvest 12 coffee beans at a time, then you'll get 4 gold coins, which is a better return. Bonanza's setup varies a bit with the number of players in the game. For a 3-player game, you'll remove all cocoa beans from the deck. In addition, each player will automatically begin play with a third bean field. They may not buy an additional third bean field during the course of the game. Then, you'll deal 5 cards to every player. It's important to say now that in Bonanza, in all versions, you may not change the order of cards in your hand. You must keep them in the order they are given to you. This includes drawing cards over the course of the game. When you draw new cards, you'll place them into your hand in order, and that will be relevant for the order you'll be planting them in. Also, for a 3-player game, the game ends after the deck has been exhausted for the 2nd time rather than the 3rd time. For a 4 or 5-player game of Bonanza, you'll remove all coffee beans from the deck. Then, like the 3-player game, you will deal 5 cards to each player, and you'll be ready to begin. For a 6 or 7-player game, you'll take out all cocoa beans and all garden beans. In addition, for a 6 or 7-player game, a third bean field costs only 2 coins rather than the normal 3 coins. Also, for a 6 or 7-player game, you'll deal out the cards a little differently. The first player will be dealt 3 cards, then the next player 4 cards, the next player 5 cards, and all remaining players will get a 6-card opening hand. This is because the earlier players will get to see more cards sooner. Then, you begin playing in turns. Bonanza, like many games, is played out in turns. On your turn, you'll go through 4 steps. The first step is to plant bean cards. In this step, you must plant your first bean in your lineup. This means that you'll plant the bean that was dealt to you the least recently. When you do so, you'll place it into one of your 2 bean fields. If you have an empty field, then you'll simply start a new field with this bean. If instead you have a bean field that matches the bean type, in other words, if I'm planting a chili bean and I already have a field of chili beans, then you'll simply add it to the stack. Otherwise, if you have 2 bean fields that are not the type that you're planting, in other words, 2 non-chili bean fields, you must harvest in order to make room for the new bean. You can harvest at any time during your turn, and when you do so, you'll trade in the cards for the number of coins shown on the beanometer. If you trade in a number of cards that do not even equal 1 coin, for instance, if I were to trade in 1 chili bean, then you simply get nothing and the beans are discarded. When harvesting beans, you must harvest a field of at least 2 beans unless all your fields have only 1. Then, of course, you can harvest one of those fields. After you've planted your first bean, you may, at your option, plant your second bean in the lineup, in this case, a soybean. You must follow the same rules as the first bean, and this is the only other bean you can plant during this phase. In step 2 of your turn, you'll draw, trade, and donate bean cards. Once you've planted your first, and optionally your second bean from your hand, you'll flip over the top 2 beans from the deck. These 2 beans, along with any beans received in trades this turn, must be planted into the owner's fields. Every trade must involve the active player and only one other player around the table. The active player may trade the 2 beans that he's revealed and/or any combination of cards from his hand. It's important to remember that when you're removing cards from your hand, they must go to the table in front of someone else. You can never trade cards from one player's hand into another player's hand. The players that aren't the active player, of course, can only trade cards from their hand. No player may trade cards that have been previously planted into fields. In step 3 of your turn, all players, not just the active player, must plant the beans that were received in phase 2 of the turn into their fields. Remember that if you do not have an open field, or a field containing the type of bean that you're planting, you must make room by harvesting beans. When you harvest, you will look at the bonometer to know how many coins your beans are worth. If I'm harvesting 4 wax beans, then they're worth 1 coin. I'll flip one of the cards onto its gold coin side and place it in front of me. Note that this takes it out of the game. Then I'll discard the remaining bean cards into the discard pile. This is a good time to mention that at any time during the game, once per game, even when it's not your turn, you may purchase a 3rd bean field for 3 gold coins. When you do this, you immediately open up another field that you can use just like your previous 2 fields. In the last step of your turn, you'll simply draw new bean cards into your hand. In a 3 to 5 player game, you'll draw 3 new bean cards. In a 6 or 7 player game, you'll draw 4 new cards. Remember that these cards must be placed in your hand in the order they are drawn. Gameplay continues until the deck is exhausted for the 3rd time. When this happens, everyone will harvest any remaining beans and then count up their gold. If multiple players are tied in gold, then the tied player with the most cards remaining in his hand will be the winner. That's how you play Bonanza. Now that you know how to play Bonanza, we're going to take a look at it in our point-counterpoint review.
Because Mike and I disagree about the game, he's going to argue for it, and I, once again, am going to argue against it.
Legitimately this time. So the first thing that jumps out about Bonanza, game by Uwe Rosenberg, made famous for Agricola. Mm-hmm. And I do love the name, Bonanza. German for bean is bone, so there's a little bit of a pun in the name. But the first thing that hits you is, because the name, the theme. Bonanza's theme, I know it's not a terribly immersive game, spoiler alert for the breakdown, but the theme just is really a lot of fun. I mean, the beans are so cute, and I always enjoy talking about them as beans. Yes, you could swap the theme out for widgets or cogs or whatever. I mean, they don't need to be beans. You could easily swap the theme for whatever you wanted. And some people, believe it or not, are turned off by the bean theme, which I can't understand. But for me, when you're playing the game, I always talk about the beans as beans. I always, when I'm trying to trade with people, I'll try to entice them by talking about the beans in the description of them. I'll say, with your acid reflux, you're not going to want those chili beans. You should get those off your hands and trade them to me. I got some you'll like, some nice soybeans. Soybeans, a million uses, great for the environment, great for your health. You'll love it. I just think it's really fun. It adds a layer of fun to the game because they're such cutesy little beans.
Well, that's true. They are cutesy. I think, we said this previously we said about Munchkin that it's a social game and you're going to get out of it what you put into it. At least that was my take on it. In thinking about this game, I think that's probably going to be true of all social games, because that's why I'm not a great big fan of this one, is that when I played it at your college's game group, but I played it with the younger end of that spectrum, and you and I had just met. And I think the other players at the table were having fun because they were all engaged and they were all in friends and they were having fun, but I was sort of the odd man out, and it just didn't really grab me mainly because I wasn't engaged in socializing in the game. So that's only going to be true if you have a table full of people. It's only going to be more true if you have a table full of people who just aren't really into the bean aspect of the game, or even the social aspect of the game. This is going to be a boring game for you if you're just not that into it.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Sorry to hear that you had that bad experience. That the game can be weak then, but this is a social game done right, folks. Bonanza has it. Unlike Munchkin, the gameplay of Bonanza drives the conversation. You don't just happen to have conversation on top of the game. The game is all about communicating.
There is something in the game that forces you to communicate.
Absolutely. And you know what? This is a game that kind of, I would say, transcends its box, because there's just so much emergent gameplay with this one.
Oh, boy.
But it's true, because I've seen people, now, if you just follow the rules as written with the strictly one-on-one trades and not being able to trade beans that you've received in a trade anymore that turn, it is a little limiting. But if you suspend those, you can really get creative. So with this one, I've seen people trade with credit. I've said, I owe you about a 20 level bean, about a soybean or a blue bean. I'll give it to you later. Or not a soybean, a wax bean or a blue bean. I'm good for it. I've seen people offer exclusive trading rights or priority trading, saying, this is kind of a good deal for me, but I'll tell you what, Tom, in the future, I'm going to give you first crack at any of my beans. I've seen people intimidate other players into trading. I've seen people just tip their hat and, say, well, you'd better trade with me or else. It's going to be a long ride home if you don't make this trade. Conversely, I've seen people place bean embargoes and bingos, if you will, on other players. And when they, I've seen somebody, make a coalition with another player and say, we're not going to make any trades with that guy over there. He's a jerk. Nobody trade with him. You know what? We're not going to trade with him. And if you trade with him, you don't trade with us. So I've seen people embargo. I have seen people make blind trades. So I've seen people saying, you know what? I don't have anything for you right now, but I'm going to draw some cards at the end of this turn, and you're going to get the last two. The last two I draw, whatever they are, they're yours for the taking. You can trade them, you can grab them, whatever you want. I've seen people make trades on the beans that they may draw. So at one point, I kid you not, I was offered somebody said, okay, I'm about to draw 4 beans at the end of my turn. Any green beans I draw are yours. You could get 4 green beans in the trade, or you get none. The risk is yours, gentle farmer. So there's just so much that goes into this game that isn't in the box. It isn't in the rules. I've never seen a game quite like this, where there's been so much gameplay and so many crazy stories that the rules facilitate.
The rules facilitate, but don't include. A lot of those trading aspects are a counter. They're a house rule. They're a counter to what's in the box, because the rules say you can't trade for the purpose of trading. You can't trade what you get in trade this turn, and you can't trade with more than one person. Mm-hmm. So if you're willing to adopt that house rule, and if I'm forced to play this game again, I absolutely will advocate for that, because I would love to be part of a bean bargo.
And then bingo, please.
And then bingo, you're right.
I've coined the term.
Bingo. Yes. The no three-way rule does hinder the creativity pretty severely.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. But even if you take away all that emergent gameplay, which I'm not willing to, you still have tremendous depth of gameplay just in the box. So the game scales really well from maybe not 3, but from 4 all the way up to 7 players, because you deal a different number of cards for the starting hands. You take out beans that are not appropriate for that number. So you take out the coffee beans for a 4-player game or a 5-player game. You'll take out the cocoa beans and garden beans for a larger game, just to make the game flow a little more smoothly.
I would say that the game scales well for 3 players, just not that entertaining for 3 players.
I would agree with that. In addition, the beans turning into the coins adds an interesting kind of scarcity to it. So in the tutorial I talked about trading in 4 wax beans, one of them becomes a coin, the rest go back in. That's something you have to think about when you're trading, is there are 22 wax beans in the deck, but now there are fewer because somebody's harvested them already. So kind of that nice flow of the cards really works for me. And finally, the hand order, the kind of driving mechanic of the hand order, just adds another layer to what would otherwise potentially be rather dry trading. When you have the hand order that you must respect and you kind of have a clock on when those beans have to go into your fields, that throws some urgency on it, and that means that beans that you wouldn't care about otherwise, suddenly you need to be very cautious, very careful with.
That actually was the most engaging part about the game for me when I was playing it, because I felt there is some strategy here. There are some other trading games out there. Pit is the first one that comes to mind. It just doesn't have that level of strategy. It's all shouting.
It's willy-nilly.
Yeah. I was really engaged by that depth of gameplay, as you say, to drop some more buzzwords on the table here. But I experienced also the planting a third bean field, and that is just not a worthwhile tactic.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. Like I said, I was sort of left out of a lot of the trading at the table, and I think the idea of the third bean field is that you can use it to garner more points, more beans, but it doesn't help. It's just too great a cost to invest to get the return you're going to need for it, unless you somehow get a windfall of the bright beans. It's just not worth it. That third bean field really takes away from the rest of the game, which is really elegantly put together.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, the third bean field, it seems like you only really need it when people are not willing to trade with you, in which case the last thing you need to be doing is spending more coins. So right. I agree, it's not usually a good idea. But on the whole, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, like I said, I didn't have the greatest time playing it, but in reviewing it for the show...
Like any social game, it's going to depend on the people.
Right, it's going to depend on the people. And I do appreciate social games in general in my own table. And in reviewing of the show, I think I came to a deeper appreciation for it. So whereas before doing this review, I would have given it maybe a 2 or a 3, I think I like it enough now. I would definitely want to play it some more. Of course, with the house rule trading.
Just open up the trading.
I think I'd give it. I'll give it a 5. I'd give it a 5. I'm not quite ready to buy it, but I would definitely play it.
That's still pretty harsh, Tom. I have to say, this one for me, it's a solid 8. I really enjoy it. I can't, like I said, it's unique in its theme. It's unique in its trading game format. There's not too many trading games out there, and darn, I can't think of another game that has elicited such interesting responses from a variety of people.
Well, there you have it. That's our review of, what's it called? Bonanza. Get ready for the breakdown. This is the breakdown of Uwe Rosenberg's Bonanza. We give it 40 short and 60 long. Your game time will vary immensely, depending on how talkative your players are. Ours wrap up in about 90 minutes. We give it 40 fast and 60 slow. The game can drag with a lot of players, especially if you're not involved in the trading. We give it 30 luck, because an abundance or lack of valuable beans will help or hinder the player who gets them. But the game is won or lost based on your skill with planting and trading, so we give it 70 skill. We give Bonanza 30 strategy, because you are often looking a turn ahead to plan out your planting. Otherwise, it's your skill at trading and planting this turn that determines how well you do, so we give it 70 tactics. We give it 95 in interaction, because it is a social trading game. We gave it only 5 independence, mainly because you have the option of planting a third bean field, and that doesn't affect the other players. We give it 20 immersion and 80 abstraction. Most of the gameplay is abstracted, but the bean theme is fun and it can aid you in trading. We give it 80 simplicity and 20 complexity. It's not difficult to teach or to learn, but there is a little bit of difficulty in adapting to the always able to harvest rule. We give it 20 expandability and 80 completeness. There are expansions for the game, but they do fundamentally change how it's played, so we don't use them. On our trophy scales, we give it 3 originality, because it's a fun trading game with a little bit more depth of gameplay than you find in that genre. We give it 3 trophies in value. It's got a moderate price, and the plastic-coated cards are as durable as they need to be. Mike gives it an 8 out of 10, Tom gives it a 5 out of 10, and that is the breakdown.
We hope you dug up some fun with us today in Bonanza. Next week in the Chit Chat, we're going to be talking about gamer etiquette, how one should behave at a table with other gamers. And we're going to be playing Dungeon Command. the tactical miniatures game from Wizards of the Coast.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel for regular updates. See the links below for our Facebook and Twitter pages, and leave us a comment on your favorite elegant games.
See you next week.
Episode 16. Intro, take one.
At least we were quiet.
Hi, and welcome to the Big Interior Designers.
The Bean-terior designers? The
Let me
Bean-terior?
sit the next couple intros out.
Bean-terior designers.
I wish we were called Bonanza.
Bonanza. Bonanza.
Stop.
Bananas.
That's way worse.
Bonanza.